My parents relinquished me for adoption due to my gender. Now, they have reached out to me, requesting financial support for my sister's education. I am a 25-year-old male. My narrative began when I was 6 years old, or rather from the moment of my birth. I am my parents' third and youngest child. We were not wealthy, but my parents earned enough to support 3 children. We lived in a small town in an ancestral home, which helped us save money. My grandparents owned a farm that provided a significant portion of our food. My father worked as a truck driver and returned home every 3 to 4 days, while my mother was a waitress. Before my birth, my parents had 2 daughters. You can imagine how I felt as the unplanned child. As a child, I was unaware of the circumstances surrounding my conception. However, as I grew older, I began to understand the situation. Discovering that I was unwanted was a challenging lesson. My parents considered relinquishing me, but the doctor advised against it due to potential health risks to my mother. My mother harbored a deep desire for a daughter. Her rationale was straightforward. She hoped to save money by reusing my sister's clothing. Despite the fact that my sisters were close in age and could easily share their clothes, my parents were profoundly disappointed when I was born a boy. They despised me for it, dressing me in my sister's old clothes and even sending me to school in their discarded uniforms. It was quite embarrassing. Although I was very young, I have vague memories of being teased for wearing a girl's uniform and having long hair. Any concerns I made were answered with a violent thrashing from my mother. I was raised in an environment characterized by abuse and harsh words, many of which I did not comprehend at the time. As I matured and gained insight into their true meaning, my feelings towards my parents evolved. While my father was marginally less abusive than my mother, his absence from our lives meant that his treatment of me fluctuated. On some days, he seemed impartial towards all 3 of us, but on others, his behavior was as severe, if not more so, than my mother's. I cannot claim to have been a perfect child. As I matured and became more aware of their preference for my sisters, I began to rebel. They were always provided with the finest of everything, while I received only leftovers in response. Consequently, I began to behave out of frustration, blaming them for my troubles. I was frequently grounded, sometimes harshly. There were several instances when I had to prepare my own breakfast and was without dinner. Reflecting on the pain of a 6-year-old, a particular incident stands out in my memory. This event marked a significant turning point in my life. I had been relentlessly bullied on the playground for pretending to be a girl. Upon returning home, I discovered that my mother had purchased new clothes for my sisters for the holidays. In a fit of anger, I took a pair of scissors and shredded their new garments into confetti. Although I acknowledged that my actions were wrong and not something I am proud of, they were driven by grief rather than malice. Rather than attempting to understand my anguish, my parents viewed my actions as an unforgivable sin that warranted the severest punishment. Consequently, they decided to place me up for adoption. Despite their efforts, no one was willing to adopt me, which only intensified their anger. I was constantly reminded of my perceived worthlessness and the fact that no one wanted me. Some of the most hurtful remarks came from my mother, who expressed regret for not conducting a gender check, as she would have never brought me into the world. It is a source of torment that my parents hold such disdain for me, for reasons beyond my control. After a period of time, when there was no response to my adoption, my parents began discussing it with their friends and family. My father knew someone in the next town who had a food truck with his wife. They were poorer than us, yet desired a child. They were in their late 30s and had been trying for over a decade without luck. My father spoke with them, and they easily consented to adopt me. I recall my father breaking the news to my mother and my sisters, and they were overjoyed to be rid of me. My father also cautioned them that the couple was impoverished and I might not be able to attend school. My mother shrugged her eyes and replied, "Who cares? Just drop him off tomorrow." I stood in the corner holding the curtain. Despite my deep-seated resentment towards my family, the thought of leaving them filled me with terror and anguish. My eyes filled with tears, but I managed to hold them back. They were so engrossed in the moment that they were unaware of my presence. Upon realizing my tears, my father approached me, massaged my back, and instructed me to pack my belongings. He promised that we would leave for my new family the following morning. That was the moment I couldn't hold back my tears. I cried out, but it went unheard. I returned to my room, packed my belongings, and fervently prayed that my new family would be less cruel. The subsequent day, my father drove me to the next town. I do not recall my emotional state during the journey. I was not crying, perhaps I was simply numbed. My new family's home was small, with only one room, and they had transformed the warehouse into my bedroom. I had no complaints. At least they had made an effort to provide me with my own area, which I had never had before. At my previous home, I slept on a cot in the corner of my sister's room, with only a little closet for my possessions. Even though the new room was smaller, it was comfortable. My adoptive parents, Mary and John, were warm and kind, but I had come from a dysfunctional home and had never known love. My parents had shown affection to my sisters, but never to me. I questioned Mary and John's intentions and felt their kindness was fleeting. I tried not to become attached to them for fear that they would forsake me as well. Childhood trauma took me several months to realize that their love was genuine and not an act. Yes, my schoolwork was disrupted that year since my parents relocated me midterm, but Mary and John agreed to enroll me the following year when I witnessed how hard they worked to save for my education. I fell in love with them. My adoption proved to be a blessing in disguise. My biological parents never returned after leaving me with Mary and John. Honestly, I was relieved here. I was treated like a boy with no shame or criticism. Mary and John operated their food truck for 14 to 16 hours daily, with their truck parked right outside their apartment. I was never alone, as I could see them from my bedroom window. Consequently, I began spending my days assisting them whenever I had free time. When I started school, I focused on my studies while also helping with chores. At the age of 10, I started assisting John at the cash register and discovered a natural talent for math. I learned about business and accounting at a young age. After high school, I aspired to run the food truck full-time, but Mary and John insisted that I complete college first. Despite their advancing age and frailty, they used their savings to support my education. I wanted to take over the company to repay their kindness, but they encouraged me to finish my college education. I enrolled in college to study business and accounting, hoping to make them proud. After a period of silence regarding my adoption, they began discussing it with their friends and relatives. My father knew someone in the next town who had a food van with his wife. They were poorer than us, yet desired a child. They were in their late 30s and had been trying for a child for almost a decade, but there had been no success. My father spoke with them, and they easily consented to adopt me. I vividly recall the moment my father informed my mother and sisters of my impending departure. They were elated at the prospect of being relieved of my presence, and my father explained our financial constraints, suggesting that I might not be able to attend school. My mother dismissed the situation with a dismissive gesture, suggesting that I should be allowed to grow up elsewhere. I stood frozen in the corner, holding onto the curtain. Despite my deep-seated hatred for my family, I was overwhelmed with fear and sorrow at the thought of leaving them. Despite my tears, I remained silent, as my family was too engrossed in their celebration to notice my distress. When my father noticed my tears, he approached me, patted my back, and instructed me to pack my belongings. We would depart the following morning to join our new family. Upon hearing this, I let out a loud cry, but I realized it was not heard. So I went to my room, packed my belongings, and fervently prayed that my new family would not be as cruel as my previous one. The subsequent day, my father drove me to the next town. I cannot recall the exact emotions I felt, but I was not crying. Perhaps I was numb as I left the house, and throughout the drive, my new family was definitely poor. They lived in a small house with only one room, which they had converted into my room. I had no problems because they at least tried to offer me a room. I've never had my own room or bed. My sisters had a bed, and I was put up on a cot in the corner of their room with my stuff stored in a small closet. This room was smaller than ours, yet it was comfortable. My adoptive parents, Mary and John, were loving and caring, but I had never experienced such love before, as I had come from a troubled home. I observed my parents' affection for my sisters, but never for me. I questioned their intentions and assumed their love was temporary. I avoided becoming attached to them to prevent the possibility of abandonment. You are aware of childhood trauma. It took several months for me to realize that they genuinely loved me and were not pretending. Yes, my school was discontinued that year due to my parents' relocation in the middle of the school year, but my new parents promised to enroll me the following year. I saw how they went above and beyond to save money so that I could attend school. That's when I started to love them back. My adoption turned out to be a blessing in disguise. My biological parents never returned after sending me to Mary and John. To be honest, I was relieved because I was treated as if I were still a boy. Mary and John were diligent individuals who operated their food truck for 14 to 16 hours daily. The truck was situated just outside our apartment. I was not left alone. When they were working, I could see them directly through my bedroom window. Eventually, I began spending my days on the truck, assisting them with everything I could. When I was admitted to the school, I dedicated all of my time to my studies while also assisting them with chores when I had time. I was a little older than 10 when I assisted John at the cash desk. I was pretty adept at calculating. I learned business and accounting from a young age. After high school, I aspired to take over their business full-time, but they insisted I complete college first. They used their savings to support me. As they grew older and more frail, they were unable to manage the food truck. I was eager to assume their responsibilities, just as they had taken mine, but they advised me to continue my education. I pursued a degree in business and accounting, driven by my entrepreneurial aspirations. My graduation day was the most memorable day of my life. John and Mary were overjoyed, and they even invited my biological parents to the convocation. However, they did not attend. Upon graduation, I envisioned managing the food van while Mary and John retired. However, they had different plans for me. They had accumulated substantial savings and offered them to me. This gesture was overwhelming. John mentioned that they could sustain themselves for a few more years without my involvement in their business. He provided me with the funds to establish my own venture. I did not want to waste their hard-earned money and time, so I used my business skills wisely. I sought out a small, struggling restaurant in a desirable neighborhood. Despite several rejections, I eventually convinced the owner to lease the property to me on a profit-sharing basis. I started from scratch, renovating the facility and developing a menu that catered to the preferences of millennials and Generation Z. My focus was on providing exceptional service to my customers. Within a year, sales surged, and 4 years later, I had doubled my initial investment. I now own 3 successful cafes in town. I relocated Mary and John to a more comfortable apartment and secured a small room for myself, as I had previously been living with them. I requested that they retire and sell their food truck, but they insisted on keeping it for their own satisfaction. When I left their house with my bag all those years ago, I had no idea I would one day graduate from college. But here I am, running a restaurant chain in town. Fast forward to last month. It was a regular day at work. I was working at the cash register of one of my eateries when I noticed a familiar face. It seemed like I'd seen a ghost. It was my biological father. I saw him after almost 2 decades. He appeared pale and sickly. He stepped across the counter with a big smile and hugged me. I didn't say anything because the restaurant was crowded and instead escorted him to a corner. Seeing his face brought back all the traumatic memories from my youth. I couldn't have written about my past in such depth if he hadn't reappeared in my life. He expressed his pride in my accomplishment and happiness. I stood there stunned, unable to answer. He informed me that he had seen John, who had been informed of my success. He stated that he would bring my mother to meet me over the weekend. I remained silent, and he left shortly after that evening. I informed John that I did not wish to meet my biological parents, who had abandoned me due to my gender. John and Mary were aware of my difficult childhood. I considered fleeing for the weekend, but Mary convinced me to forgive them and move forward. I agreed to meet them, contingent upon John and Mary's presence. My biological parents visited John's residence, and I anticipated an apology for their actions. However, they expressed no remorse, instead recounting the kindnesses they had bestowed upon me. My mother expressed gratitude for having found me such wonderful parents, John and Mary, who had raised me to be successful. I was taken aback. I was tempted to confront them, but Mary reassured me to remain composed. I responded with gratitude for having John and Mary as my parents. The entire encounter was awkward and uncomfortable for me. The following day, I received a call from my biological mother, whose voice I did not recognize. It was the first time she had contacted me in 20 years. She was not phoning to reconcile, but to request financial assistance. She informed me that my father had lost his regular job and had been working on a contract basis for several years. She also mentioned that she had lost her job due to the reluctance of restaurants to hire a 50-year-old waitress, and that they were currently experiencing financial difficulties. I inquired about the amount she required, to which she responded that $20,000 would suffice. She had borrowed the money from her friends over the previous 3 months to purchase groceries and maintain the property. Her friends now wanted the money back, but she did not have it. I hung up the phone, stating that I would consider it and get back to her. The truth is, despite my disdain for them, I feel terrible that people are pursuing them for financial gain. Sometimes I think she's simply taking advantage of me. But what if they really need help? I'd feel horrible letting them go through embarrassment, especially considering I have the money. Update 1. Thank you for all of your remarks and congratulations. There were differing opinions on whether I should help my mother with $20,000. I consulted with Mary and John. Mary was pleased that I was considering assisting my parents, but she also advised me to be cautious. John stated that it was my money, thus the decision was mine, but he shared the same concern. What if they were attempting to manipulate my emotions? After much deliberation, I chose to seize my first and only shot with my biological parents. I transferred the money to her account. It felt nice at first to aid my family, despite the fact that they had mistreated me. But as I suspected, they began to exploit me financially, so I quickly recognized I had been correct. A week after sending the money, my mother called me back. My response was conflicted. She thanked me for my assistance and then asked when I could visit. For a time, I believed they genuinely wanted me back in their lives, despite everything my parents had done to me. I never harbored a deep resentment towards my sisters as a child. Although I may have been rude to them, I never blamed them for what happened. It was not their fault. I often wondered if my parents abandoned me because they were poor, not because they were nasty. I informed my mother that we could meet on Sunday and I would drive home, but she interjected and suggested meeting somewhere outside. I didn't think much of it at the moment, but agreed. She agreed to text me the place and time. However, after the call, I felt nervous. Why didn't they want me to come to their home? Yes, it doesn't matter where we meet, but after so many years, wouldn't you rather meet your family at home than in a restaurant? Subsequently, she sent me information about an expensive restaurant. At the time, I was still upset that they hadn't invited me home. Upon arriving at the restaurant, I was surprised to find my sisters already there. They rushed to embrace me, and for a moment, I was overjoyed to see them. After many years, we enjoyed catching up until the menu arrived, prompting them to order the most expensive dishes. When asked about his choice, my father smiled and suggested ordering the most costly item. My son has grown into a man. It was a petty remark to make. If John or Mary had said that, I would have been proud, but hearing it from my biological parents felt cruel and manipulative. There was little I could do. I sat there watching them enjoy themselves, knowing full well that they were draining my money. Yes, I did pay the bill too. I had wild thoughts about ghosting them before the bill arrived, but that would have been too cruel right there and there. I told myself I would never fall into their emotional trap again. I remained cold for the rest of the evening, and I doubt anyone noticed when we were leaving. They did not invite me home. Instead, my older sister inquired, "Where are we dining next?" I feigned a smile and responded, "Nowhere," before waving them goodbye. Upon my return, I shared my experiences with Mary. She was taken aback by my relatives' behavior. Mary, a gentle and independent woman, found their actions troubling. She advised me against acting impulsively and to focus on my own life rather than others. I took her advice to heart. A week later, my sisters called, but I did not answer. My mother called, but I also ignored her. It has been 2 months since then, and they have stopped contacting me. I believe they finally received the message that I do not want them in my life. Hello, everyone. Thank you for all the love. As I indicated in my last essay, I stopped responding to my sisters and biological parents after realizing they only wanted me for my money. My mother called me again after nearly 5 months. I answered the phone impulsively. She began with a small conversation, inquiring about my well-being and career, but it sounded artificial and pretentious. I couldn't bear it any longer and asked, "What do you want?" She took a deep breath and explained that my sisters had to drop out of college due to financial difficulties. They requested my sponsorship for their college education. I was taken aback, and my mother urged me to remain calm, emphasizing that they are my sisters and part of my family, and I should assist them. However, I was at work and did not want to disrupt my day, so I hung up. She called me back that evening. I had ignored her calls a few times, but it bothered me. I recognized that ignoring her was not the solution. When she called again, I answered. She responded, "Your sisters are really pleased to return to their college. So how are we going to handle this? Will you pay all at once or by semester? I advise you to transfer the entire sum to me, and I will handle the tuition payments each semester. That way you won't have to worry about anything." I was stunned. I replied, "Well, hold on. I am not going to make any payments." She sounded genuinely astonished, as if she had not expected no to be an option. She asked, "What do you mean you won't pay everything at once?" "It's great. We can also pay in installments." I reiterated, "I'm not paying any. My sister's schooling is not my obligation, especially since my parents abandoned me and never followed up with me. Now you're only talking to me because you want to take my money?" She erupted with rage and lost control. "Do not forget that we gave birth to you. We are responsible for your current state. Your father secured a suitable guardian for you, and now that it is time to repay us, you must accept your obligations. Your sisters and parents are your responsibility, and you must take care of them all." I had a lot to say, but I knew it would be lost on deaf, egocentric ears, so I calmly responded, "Yes, I owe a lot to my parents, John and Mary. They deserve all credit for my success. As for you, I am not sure who you are. None of my documents bear your names, nor do I have any images of you, so I do not think I know you at all." She began throwing insults at me, but I simply said, "Wrong number, lady," and disconnected up. I am not going to spend my hard-earned money on my so-called family. They were never my family. They abandoned me when I was only 6 years old. And yes, I did see some comments on my last post on why I called John and Mary by their names rather than mom and dad. Actually, I call them mom and dad now. It didn't happen right away when I moved home with them, but as time went and they worked hard to provide for me, love me, and get me into school, I grew devoted to them. For the sake of clarity in this narrative, I refer to them as John and Mary, but to me, they're my true mother and father. I don't call my biological parents anything because they don't exist to me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.